May the House come to order. We will now be moving on to the second resolution, made submitted by Venezuela and France. The head chair now yields chairing rights to the deputy chair.
The House will now debate the resolution on the issue of providing adequate housing to refugees awaiting asylum grants submitted by the delegate of Venezuela and France. May the main submitter of this resolution please rise and read out all the operative clauses, excluding all subclauses.
Operative Clause 1 reviews the contemporary definitions of refugees and means that asylum grants are given in measures such as but not limited to. Operative Clause 2 calls for member states to form and support an organization called Global Escapee Transnational Organization of Universal Transition, Get Out, for the purpose such as but not limited to. Encourages neighboring countries via monetary incentives made through bilateral deals between hosting and origin countries to accept Class 1 and Class 2 asylum seekers for reasons such as but not limited to. Operative Clause 4, urging the member nations to follow a legal framework on the notion of granting autonomy over adapting quotas for the purpose of guiding nations and facilitating the refugee crisis, containing the guidances such as but not limited to. Operative Clause 5 recommends member states to prevent hate crimes directed towards refugees through methods such as but not limited to. May he now begin his main submitter speech.
Before beginning the speech, keep in mind that other delegates who are wishing to submit any amendments, please send the amendments to the head chair by Zoom chat. You may begin the speech.
Thank you very much. Honorable chairs and fellow delegates, Europe is in the middle of a refugee crisis. It is a crisis because most refugees coming over to the European countries that are culturally disconnected, do not generate much income, and they are in charge of the rapidly increasing crime rates. Greece is suffering from an economic crisis ever since the 2010s. However, Greece has been forced to intake a lot of refugees coming from Syria through Turkey and other African nations. And ladies and gentlemen, the delegate of France is here to state that the resolution is going to solve the problem. We will send refugees back to where they came from. We've already accepted enough refugees over the last decades. We do not have space to accept any more of them. According to the European Union, 60% of the refugees that are entering Europe or are entering because of the economic purpose instead of entering due to an actual crisis or conflict that is putting them in danger in their countries. He believes that it is the role of this resolution and the global community to send back this 60% to where they came from, as we do not need these people here, and these people should not be here, as they're solely coming into the European Union to extract its economic resources, and not because they are in actual danger when they are coming, when they were back in their home countries. Ladies and gentlemen, this resolution starts by classifying the refugees into three classes. Class 1 and Class 2 are groups of refugees that would need to stay in the European Union or should be transferred to other nations that is not their home country. However, Class 3 will be the 60% of the refugees that are currently in the European Union that are solely here to extract the European monetary resources, despite the European Union being in the middle of a pandemic and suffering from high employment rates and an economic crisis. Sweden was one of the nations that decided to accept an unlimited number of refugees. Despite having a population of only 95 million people, Sweden accepted 200,000 refugees on an annual basis. The problem is not that the European Union is refusing to accept enough refugees. The real problem is that countries like Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, countries that are fully capable of accepting refugees, and countries that are also have a Muslim cultural background, so that most refugees can be culturally relatable when in these countries, are not accepting the refugees and putting the burden on the European countries and other MEDCs. This resolution acknowledges the fact that many refugees are affected by the level of hate crimes and they're residing in the European nations, and if actively targets the problem to mediate the level of hate towards the refugees by relocating them to various detention camps and isolated cultural residential zones. And for the 60% that should not be in the European Union, we will send them back to where they came from. The exact purpose of this organization, Get Out. Get Out will host negotiations between the home countries and the refugees and host the nation to effectively transfer the Class 3 refugees to where they came from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Is the delegate up to any point of information?
He is open to any and all points of information.
The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House? The delegate of Pakistan and Syrian Arab Republic, you have been recognized in that order.
Thank you, the delegate of France, for your well-practiced speech. However, the delegate of Pakistan is wondering if, according to the delegate of France's word, even Europe is unable to handle this crisis, how does this delegate is expecting other LEDCs and nations that are in the middle of those conflicts to be able to handle this refugee crisis?
First of all, he's not stating that the LEDCs that are in conflict should be accepting these refugees. He is rather stating that despite a lot of the LEDCs being economically capable, a lot of them are not accepting refugees. And the sole concentration of the refugees are in the European nations and nations like Turkey, instead of other LEDCs or moderately developed countries, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait. These countries, despite being fully capable, are not accepting any refugees. And we are going to send the European refugees to those countries instead of accepting more in the European Union.
Follow up?
Granted.
However, is it the delegate of France's words contrary to the European continent's promise to the world that it wishes to remain a continent that is open to foreign culture, learning, and social progress for the peace of mankind, as said in the European Constitution?
As stated in the European Constitution, the European Union is open to coming immigrants. And however, when he means immigrants, he means legal immigrants, immigrants that are documented, immigrants that have a basis, immigrants that are coming out with a proper work visa, an educational visa. This is what he's talking about when the European Union should be accepting these new immigrants. However, the thing with the refugee is that they slide across the Mediterranean, they slide across the English Channel into the European nations. They dominate our economy. They're in charge of most of the crime rates that are currently increasing within the European Union. And certainly, these people are not welcome in the European Union.
Thank you.
For the detailed resolution, for countries facing a refugee crisis, they often do not have a strong economic and political status due to the confusion despite addressed primary causes such as war. But to increase the economic and political stability of a country, we need the help of our people. Does the delegate of France believe that clause 2 subclause A can help those origin country?
The delegate apologizes. Can the deputy chair request the delegate of Syrian Arab Republic to rephrase her POI in a more enunciated manner?
Can the delegate of Syria please rephrase her question?
For countries facing a refugee crisis, they do not have a strong economic and political status due to the confusion despite being addressed problems. Then does the delegate of France believe that clause 2 subclause A can help those origin country?
So first of all, what you would like to mention is that when he means that there is a refugee crisis in a country, it is the crisis that is caused because the refugees coming into the country. France has a refugee crisis. Syria does not have a refugee crisis because Syria is in charge of sending out the refugees. Their irresponsible government is sending out the refugees to France. So Syria does not have a refugee crisis. It is France, it is Germany, it is Spain that has a refugee crisis. Answering the point of our operative clause 2 subclause A, the thing with these refugees is that class 3 refugees should be returning to their home countries as class 3 refugees solely within the European Union because of economic opportunities instead of political asylum, instead of being their lives threatened by a war that is going on or their lives being threatened because of a national government that is coming after them. These people, class 3 refugees, are these people that do not belong in the European Union because they're solely here to extract the European economic resources.
Follow-up, Chair. The delegate of Syrian Arab Republic is fully aware that Syria is one of the countries with largest refugees. But can the delegate of France explain more on the standard of having the economic and political status of the refugee origin country to have repatriation of the refugee?
When he's talking about the economic stability of the nation that he's going to extradite the refugees to, he's referring to how stable the economy is. When he's talking about the political stability, he's talking about whether there's a war going, whether there is some internal conflict that is threatening the lives of the refugees that is going on within the home country. If there is a war that is breaking out in Syria and people are dying from this war breaking out, then no, he's not going to send the refugee back to the nation. He will rather transport these refugees to other countries that are neighboring Syria that do not have an internal political crisis. However, when Syria is stable, when Syria does not have any significant conflict within the nation that is going on, that is threatening the lives of the citizens, he's more than happy to send these class 1 and class 2 refugees back to Syria.
Thank you, Delegate. Would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair or to another delegate?
You'd like to yield the floor to the delegate of Venezuela.
Does the delegate of Venezuela accept the yield?
Yes.
That is in order. The delegate may begin his speech now.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, and most esteemed guests. This delegate would like to provide another view to this whole resolution on the view of the origin country. This delegate believes that the sovereignty of nations must be kept on 2 layers. First, on the false refugees from origin countries, and second, from the host country's economy. On the first layer, false refugees from origin countries, this delegate believes that origin countries, the refugees from the origin countries are not only being unfairly extrapolated and unfairly exploited. This delegate also believes that on the second layer, given the host country's economy previously talked about by the delegate of France, this delegate believes the economy of, for instance, France or these host countries are actually being exploited by these refugees, and this delegate believes that on both layers, the sovereignty of nations must be kept. And turning the House's attention to Operative Clause 1, this delegate would like to talk about the significance of categorizing and classifying the refugees. And in no means are we just throwing the refugees under the bus. We're actually categorizing them so that we can actually know which refugees are actually quote-unquote real refugees or quote-unquote false refugees, to actually distinguish between the priorities that we should have for the refugees. And to clarify, we're no means are we just throwing them under the bus. And that is why I would like to turn the House's attention to Operative Clause 3, because it specifically states that we will entertain refugees, real refugees, right? And by real refugees, we obviously mean refugees of class 1 and class 2, because those are the ones who are on the front line getting all the blame and actually taking who are those actually affected by as refugees, right? And it also talked, and there was one POI about how LDCs can't accept, and that's why we're keeping the sovereignty of nations, right? That the LDCs actually have a choice to choose if they can actually take in refugees or not. It's up to that nation. So LDCs can't accept is not really actual concern. And you might later talk about how then no nation is going to actually take in and entertain refugees, which I'll later talk about. But turning the House's attention to Operative Clause 4, that is exactly what it is talking about. Quotas will be abolished. Quotas will be flexible. Affirmative action will be abolished, and it will be conditionally accepted. This whole clause talks about how it can change so that refugees that are actually in need are efficiently entertained, yet protecting the sovereignty of each individual nation, so that the nation, the origin country, is actually taking in and deciding who to take in, not actually some other legally binding power, such as the Security Council of the European Union, which is nonsense, right? But why should they even care? Why should origin countries even care? Host countries even care? And why should these LDCs or host countries take these refugees in the first place? This delegate believes that there are mainly 4 incentives that are provided, right, for these LDCs or host countries to actually take in refugees. First, monetary incentives specific to LDCs. This is clearly said in the resolution, right, that we'll give monetary incentives, right, to specifically LDCs. On the second layer, there will be monetary incentives specifically in bilateral deals between origin and host countries. 3, jobs are taken by these refugees. It's rather a intrinsic incentive that exists because in refugees, but that most jobs that actually people and citizens in the country don't want to do, it's the fact is that these refugees actually take those jobs jobs that we conventionally say or citizens say as dirty, right? And this delegate believes that this is an intrinsic incentive that just follows, right? And on the fourth layer, or the last layer, is a rather mitigative incentive, but Operative Clause 5 talks about preventing hate crimes and creating a refugee-friendly nation. And this delegate believes that on all four layers of incentives, it all leads back to these LEDCs, or host countries, host countries actually taking in refugees, right? To clear up one main misconception that is talked about, this delegate would like to say that just because, for instance, Arabia, a gay person from Arabia just ran and was a refugee, they wouldn't go to Syria where there's a similar custom, and they still be oppressed. They would go to another place, for instance, like America, and they'd be a refugee in America, not Syria. And this delegate believes that on all layers, because there's an incentive, there's an actual tangible and feasible manner it is dealing with refugees. This delegate would like to encourage all member nations to vote for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Is the delegate open to any points of information?
Any and all.
The delegate has opened himself up to any and all points of information. Are there any delegates wishing to speak? The delegate of Pakistan, you have been recognized.
Thank you, the delegate of Venezuela, for a passionate speech. However, does the delegate agree that it would be more cost efficient for refugees to be settled in MEDCs directly, since the basic infrastructures needed are already being equipped, rather than taking the long way around and funding the LEDCs?
The delegate believes that that's a very selfish POI on two layers. First layer, it's not taking into consideration the fact that these refugees, if they go to countries that are larger, for instance, like France, and where there's already anti-refugee movements or such and such, it's only going to harm these refugees. And on the second layer, we're trying to send, the resolution is trying to send these refugees to places where they can actually feel comfortable in, right? So those countries that actually have, for instance, an economy, but yet still, because LEDCs do have an economy, but yet still actually keep their culture and actually feel comfortable in that community. But actually, this also believes that it's actually these origin countries that are paying these monetary incentives to these LEDCs or these host countries, so it wouldn't be a matter for these refugees.
Thank you, Delegate. The floor is once again open to any delegates wishing to speak for this resolution. Are there any in the House?
Motion to move to the previous question.
Are there any seconds? Are there any objections?
Objection.
The motion is not granted due to the objection. The floor is now open to any delegates wishing to speak for the resolution. The chair allots 40 minutes for the debate for the resolution. Are there any in the House wishing to speak at this point? The delegate of France, you have been recognized.
Honorable chairs and fellow delegates, the delegate of France certainly believes that this resolution is going to promote using the favorable methods to extradite these refugees that are not needed in the European Union, and also to extradite these refugees that illegally made their way into the European Union. Yes, he does realize there is an international crisis of refugees, and refugees are flowing out of their nations into many different countries. However, here is the thing that many nations are failing to consider. The first level of the many nations are failing to consider is the fact that the European Union is already overloaded with the current refugee crisis. The population of the European Union is currently at 746.4 million. However, the European Union is being forced to take over 70 million refugees within its territories. This means that 1 in 10 residents in the European Union currently are refugees. This is highly contrasting to Pakistan, with hundreds of millions of population, and despite having hundreds of millions of population, hundreds of millions, Pakistan only is accepting 1.4 million refugees from Afghanistan. And this applies with other nations. Egypt also has tens of millions of population, yet they only are accepting a very limited number of refugees into their nation. Therefore, he believes that this burden should not be on the European Union, but rather the global society should take these refugees and take the burden together. And in order to do this, his resolution establishes an organization called Get Out. Organization called Get Out is not only going to stop other nations from forcing the European nations to take in the refugees, but what Get Out also does is it assists the national government to host a referendum to decide whether that nation is going to accept the refugees or will they not. In other words, we will leave the choice on the hands of the citizens. We're not saying we're not going to kick all the refugees out. What we're trying to say is that each nation is a sovereign state, and each nation should be able to decide, the people should be able to decide whether or not they are going to be deciding the refugees. So he believes that if each member state supports the autonomy of the member states, he does not see a reason why any nation would vote against this resolution, as this resolution's intention is to respect the autonomy of each nation and to recognize that the people of the nations have the choice, especially depending on their economic status, on whether or not to accept these additional refugees into their countries.
Thank you, Delegate. Is the delegate open to any POIs?
He is open to any and all points of information.
The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any delegates wishing to speak at this point? Seeing the delegate of Lebanon, you have been recognized.
Thank you, Delegate, for your speech. Does the delegate recognize that there are currently hundreds of thousands of people in countries neighboring to Syria, for example, that are already seeking asylum from the EU? Where would these refugees be redirected, as they are currently seeking asylum in the EU specifically?
The delegate believes that the audio quality of the delegate of Lebanon is kind of off. Is it okay if the delegate of Lebanon can type? Can the chairs grant the delegate of Lebanon to type her POI in the chat box instead?
Can the delegate of Lebanon please type her POI into the chat box? Can the delegate type? Okay.
Delegates, the chair would like to remind everybody that POIs in note forms are also possible. So if there are any problems with audio, you can just send your POI through direct message.
So the delegate of Lebanon had, can you proceed? I think it was Joel. The delegate of Lebanon asked that as they're seeking asylum in the European Union, where will they be redirected to from the legal process? Again, this depends on the economic background, or basically the background of each refugee. If the refugee is classified as class 1 or class 2 refugees, so their lives are being threatened and they're back in their home countries, then these refugees will be redirected to other nations that are capable of accepting them, because it is way more cost efficient for nations such as Pakistan, nations such as Bangladesh, to keep these refugees rather inside of a instead of countries like France with a high inflation rate, because the cost of living is generally cheaper in those countries. So we will be redirecting these refugees back to those countries. However, if the refugee is a class 3 refugee, which consists of 60% of the refugee population in the European Union, and these refugees' lives or none of it's being threatened, but they're solely sliding across the Mediterranean into the European Union for the purpose of seeking economic opportunities and extracting the European economic resources, we will have no option but to send these refugees back, to extradite these refugees back to their home country, as their lives where nothing is really being threatened for them to stay in the European Union.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Delegate. Would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair or to another delegate?
You'd like to yield the floor back to the chair.
Okay, that is in order. The floor is now once again open to any delegates wishing to speak for the resolution. Are there any in the House? The delegate of China, you have been recognized.
This delegate would like to forward this resolution. This delegate encourages neighboring countries to accept asylum seekers for reasons such as, but not limited to, recognizing that the refugees themselves may feel isolated due to not only the cultural but geographical differences, and realizing distance and lack of communication with families into the home country and countries of asylum. Also, this country believes that every country must have the freedom of choice to take on the burden of helping others, particularly when combined with perceptions that the problem causing the refugee outflows was nothing to do with that country.
Thank you, delegate. Is the delegate open to any POIs?
Any PO?
That is in order. The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House? Seeing none, would the delegate of Pakistan, you have been recognized.
Sorry for the lag, but okay. Thank you for the delegate of China for a well-practiced speech. According to the 1951 the Refugee Convention of 1951, it is an international consensus that refugees are forcibly displaced and thus shall not be considered as illegal immigrants. Therefore, this delegate agreed that refugees should not be rejected or repatriated because they do not have a work or travel visa.
This delegate believes that it's the country's choice to accept the asylum seekers, because if refugees poses a risk to the country's society, it can be rejected for the asylum seekers to be not accepted in the country.
Thank you.
Thank you, delegate. Would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair or to another delegate? That is in order. The floor is now once again open to any delegates wishing to speak for the resolution. Are there in the House? Delegate of Sweden, you have been recognized.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, and most esteemed guests, the delegate of Sweden strongly urges fellow delegates to vote for this resolution. The European Union is suffering. Greece is suffering. France is suffering. Sweden is suffering. The resolution presents comprehensive solutions that can prevent this suffering, as well as and provides aid to dire refugees as stated in Operative Clause 1. The resolution does not only attempt to just assist the refugees in being admitted to MEDCs, it also attempts to protect sovereignty in various countries, as mentioned in Operative Clause 2. This delegate sees great potential in this resolution and also sees that this resolution focuses on two fields, the perspectives of the refugees and the perspective of the countries admitting the refugees, and therefore urges all the delegates to vote for this resolution.
Thank you, delegate. Is the delegate to any points of information?
And
The delegate has opened herself to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House wishing to speak? Seeing none, would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair or to another delegate?
Back to the chair.
That is in order. The floor is now open to any delegates wishing to speak for the resolution. Are there any in the House? The delegate of Venezuela, you have been recognized.
This delegate believes that he has submitted an amendment.
That is in order. Can the head chair share the slides? The delegate of Venezuela has made an amendment to strike clause 1 and subclause B, subclause I. May the delegate of Venezuela make his point.
Chair apologizes. The request was not a strike, so I will go ahead and edit that. Please begin your speech.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, to most esteemed guests, this delegate believes that the following should be changed, as from class 2 refugees should be defined as people who are on the verge of losing their means of livelihood and homes, but can still sustain lives to a degree where they can eat, live at homes and sleep. This delegate believes that it should be changed to the following. Class 2 refugees should be defined as people who have already been negatively affected, yet not to the level they cannot sustain to the full extent their livelihoods, or where they can eat and sleep. This delegate believes that this actually makes a clear distinction between class 2 refugees and class 3 refugees, because previously class 2 refugees was quite similar to class 3 refugees on the fact that it was a short-term potential refugee and class 3 was a long-term potential refugee. And this delegate also believes that it only makes a more priority to actually prioritize class 2 refugees. Why? Because before, class 2 refugees were those on the verge, and they have no reason when they can still sustain their lives and where they can live and where they can sleep, where they can still sustain such means of livelihood. This delegate sees no means or no reason for these refugees to actually go and become refugees in another nation. Delegate believes that, as previously spoken by the delegate of France, delegate believes that it only is for such a refugee to become a refugee. The only purpose is to actually extract the economy and exploit the economy of other nations. And this delegate believes that this delegate would like to say that real refugees are the ones actually need to be entertained by each individual nation. And this delegate believes that this amendment actually sets a priority to actually prioritize such refugees, real refugees that are actually those being negatively affected. And this delegate would like to encourage all member nations to vote for this amendment.
Thank you, delegate. Is the delegate open to any POI?
Any and all.
The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House? Seeing none, would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair?
Yes.
Or to
Oh wait, could the delegate yield to the delegate of France?
does the delegate of France accept the yield?
Yes, he accepts the yield.
That is in order. The delegate may begin his speech.
Well, before this amendment was submitted, the delegate of France certainly believed that the definition of class 2 refugees was not only vague, but was actually covering a bit too much, was too large of a group. However, by the delegate of Venezuela submitting this amendment to limit the class 2 refugees to people who have already been negatively affected, he believes that this is a more direct approach and this is a more clear approach, as this categorizes the class 2 refugees as refugees that have been directly affected. Therefore, he believes that this amendment does not only clarify the class 2 refugees with a more clear definition, but he also believes that because this class 2 refugees will actually be the standing line that defines whether or not refugees should be accepted into another country or not, and whether or not the European Union should be accepting these refugees or not. He believes that if you're a European Union nation, if you're a European, you should vote for this amendment, as this amendment makes the definition far more clear for the European Union and other countries that are holding a larger number of refugees. Therefore, he would like to emphasize the fact that if the delegates this nation of representation is already holding a large number of refugees, or if the delegate is part of the European Union, which also holds a large number of refugees, and because of the Schengen Treaty, there is a high chance from the refugees flowing from one European nation to another European nation, he believes that they should vote for this amendment so that it can make the resolution even more clear for the EU nations to vote for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Is the delegate open to any points of information?
He is open to any and all points of information.
That is in order. The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House? Seeing none, would the delegate like to yield the floor back to the chair or to another delegate?
You would like to yield the floor back to the chair.
That is in order. The floor is once again open to any delegates wishing to speak for or against the amendment. Are there any in the House? The delegate of Pakistan, you have been recognized.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, and distinguished guests, the delegate of Pakistan disagrees with the intention behind this amendment. As in subclause C of clause 1, class 1 refugees will only be entertained while other classes will, for the time period, be disregarded. However, if we adopt this amendment, those people that are already negatively impacted by the crisis are purposefully neglected, which is against the key spirit of the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Therefore, for those reasons, the delegate urges all member nations to vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, delegate. Is the delegate open to any points of information?
Any and all.
The delegate has opened himself to any and all points of information. Are there any delegates wishing to speak? The delegate of Venezuela and France, you have been recognized in that order.
Doesn't the delegate believe that by making such redefinitions of class 2 refugees and class 1 refugees, and by actually specifying them, doesn't the delegate believe that it's actually only better prioritizing certain refugees?
The delegate of Pakistan believes that no one wants to flee their homeland, and it is unjustified and immoral to classify such people that are actually affected by the conflict into three tiers or 3 classes.
Follow up. But isn't the fact that a lot of people actually go for instance, like larger countries like America or like France or these MEDCs actually to extract their economy and exploit their economy just for the purpose of economic benefit rather than other benefits that they, for instance, like harms in their origin country?
This should be discussed in another case, and the delegate of Pakistan does not acknowledge that people disguise themselves as refugees just to extract economic and social economic benefits from more economically developed nations. This is simply not a reality, this delegate believes.
The delegate of Pakistan has stated in his previous PO answer to the POI, stating that most of the people that are coming from or pretty much everyone that is seeking asylum within the European Union nations are actually there because of some direct danger that they're facing. However, does the delegate of Pakistan not realize the fact that a European Union study outlines that 60% of the refugees that come to the European Union or that are accepted or that are currently residing in the European Union are actually in the European Union because they are seeking for a better economic opportunities rather than because they are in direct danger and because their lives are being threatened by a national government or some other source of rebellion.
The delegate believes that people, it is the human nature for people to pursue the better. And if the refugees were met to choices between choosing a more economically developed nation where the nation has better medical resources and a more open social social atmosphere, then it is a human nature to choose a better environment than selecting, for example, going to a less economically developed nation where there might be where the social economic situation might not be as stable and as developed than those MEDCs in Europe or other parts of the world.
Chair, Your Honor, the delegate requests a follow-up POI. Thank you so much. Does the delegate of Pakistan not realize the fact that the definition of a refugee is a person that is escaping in order to escape war, persecution, or a natural disaster, and not to seek for a better opportunity, economic opportunity? And does he not realize the fact that a person that is seeking for a better opportunity is an immigrant, not a refugee that who has their lives in danger, due to some internal conflict or due to some persecution issues?
Yes, the delegate wholeheartedly agrees with the definition of refugee in established in the 1951 Refugee Convention. However, this delegate is also willing to raise the awareness that the refugee has a choice to flee to different nations, and we shouldn't condemn those refugees for selecting so-called a better nation or a more developed nation just because they have no choice.
Thank you, Delegate. Due to the time constraints, the House will now move to the voting procedure of this amendment. May the admin secure the call and get into voting procedures. Delegates wishing to vote in favor of this amendment, please click yes in your reactions. The delegates wishing to vote against, please click no in your reactions. The delegates wishing to abstain, please raise your hands high. With 6 votes for, 9 votes against, the amendment does not pass. Clapping is not in order. The House will now move to debate against the resolution as a whole. Are there any delegates wishing to speak? The chair allots 15 minutes and will continue the debate after lunch. The delegate of Germany, you have been recognized.
Right. The delegate of Germany strongly encourages everyone to vote against this resolution for several reasons. The first being, and that it actually doesn't answer the question correctly. The question of this conference is providing adequate housing to refugees awaiting asylum grants, but this resolution seems more focused on validating or invalidating the existence of refugees themselves. And the second thing being that this delegate has a concern with Clause 3 because this delegate doesn't understand where the monetary incentives would come from. And yes, that is all.
Thank you, delegate, for your speech. Is the delegate open to any points of information?
Any and all pertaining to the speech.
The delegate has opened herself to any and all points of information. Are there any delegates wishing to speak? The delegate of France, Sweden, US, Venezuela, and China, you have been recognized in that order.
The delegate of Germany has been stating that the European Union nations or other nations should be responsible for taking refugees. However, does the delegate of Germany not realize that during the New Year's Eve sexual assaults in Germany, which occurred between 2015 and 2016, in a German city, there were over 1,000 Middle Eastern or Northern African asylum seekers were actually arrested due to theft, robbery, or violent crimes crimes or rape, or even in Germany?
Well, according to the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel's statement in 2014, Germany will continue to accept and support as many refugees as we can. And the instance of refugees being bad people is just something that we will have to accept, because overall there has been a great increase personally for Germany in both its economy and society. And just because the fact that they sometimes commit crimes doesn't mean that refugees don't deserve a safe place to live.
Chair, the delegate requests a follow. A brief. Thank you. However, does the delegate of Germany not realize the fact that one of the primary reasons that the former German Chancellor Merkel was actually voted out of the parliament, and the reason that the rival party of the Chancellor Merkel's political party won the most recent election in Germany is primarily because Chancellor Merkel has decided to flow the German nation with the refugees, and the German nation had to face an increasing crime rate, inflation, and an increasing unemployment rate. Does the delegate of Germany not realize the fact that that is the exact reason why the German Chancellor Merkel got voted out of the office?
Well, that's irrelevant, because the Chancellor stepped down and announced that she would not be running for the 2021 election after having already served 5 terms. And governments change hands all the time. What does that have to do with anything?
Thank you, delegate, for her speech. But the delegate stated that the resolution as a whole focuses on defining what refugees are instead of actually solving the issue. But does the delegate not realize that for European nations who have already accepted a lot of refugees, this classification system is crucial in order for them to sustain their economy at the same time attempting to resolve the issue at hand?
POI to the chair, could the delegate of Sweden please rephrase the question, as this delegate does not quite understand their intention?
The delegate of Sweden, please rephrase her question.
The delegate in her speech mentioned that the resolution as a whole mostly focuses on defining the refugees rather than attempting to solve the issue at hand. But does the delegate not realize that for European nations who are already supporting a lot of refugees, this classification system is necessary for them to sustain their economy while at the same time attempting to resolve the issue at hand?
According to the delegate, these two things don't exactly correlate, because no matter how many refugees are accepted or how many people are granted asylum, then whatever interim place they may be given to live while awaiting for those processes to be filed, that is like the concern at hand, rather than if they are really a refugee deserving asylum.
The delegate's question has been answered.
The delegate would like to ask the delegate of Germany. As stated by the delegate of France, German Chancellor Merkel's party, the CDU, is not in power. They lost the election because of her refugee policies. And doesn't this directly correlate by saying that the citizens actually weren't in support of such refugee policy, just showing that the fact that the citizens weren't actually in support of it, but rather such policies were actually still enforced upon the nation?
Well, in the end, the government decides, not the people, right?
Follow. But doesn't the delegate believe that a nation made of the people, by the people, for the people should actually revolve around the people, not actually just around a totalitarianistic government?
This delegate believes that calling Germany a totalitarian government is a bit of a reach. But while it is true that citizens should be able to have some say in how the country is run. Their government officials are elected for such reasons, and sometimes one party is unpopular and then another party comes to power.
Thank you.
Delegate of China, please state your points of information. The floor is now once again open to any delegates wishing to speak against the resolution. Are there any in the House? The delegate of US, you have been recognized.
After witnessing quite a lot of discussion amongst the House, the delegate of the US believes that after reading the resolution as well, there's overall a quite negative and quite derogatory tone towards refugees within the European Union. And that it seems that the Europeans aren't interested in any single way of actually helping any of the refugees. Although they implement a system that's supposed to classify the refugees, it doesn't actually help them in any single way. And there's also a lack of mentioning the question at all as well, providing adequate housing. It seems to be quite distant or vague or almost not mentioned at all within this resolution. And so the delegate of the US believes that this resolution should not pass at all because it does not in any way fulfill the interests of the refugees and only the interests of the European Union.
The delegate, is the delegate open to any points of information?
Any and all pertaining to a speech.
Delegate has opened themselves to any and all points of information. Are there any in the House? The delegate of Venezuela and France, you have been recognized in that order.
Doesn't the delegate believe that the resolution as a whole, by actually prioritizing class 1 and class 2 refugees, is actually taking into consideration the fact that not all refugees cannot be taken into one specific country, and therefore prioritizing certain refugees that need to be prioritized that are actually being negatively affected by their origin countries, and therefore this resolution is actually combating the issue at hand?
GY to the chair, could the delegate please rephrase their question in a more concise manner?
May the delegate of Venezuela please rephrase his question?
Doesn't the delegate believe that by the resolution is actually relevant because by categorizing and classifying and prioritizing certain refugees, specifically class 1 and class 2 refugees, is actually tackling the issue because it's actually taking into consideration the fact that not all refugees can be taken, and there are numerous refugees on hold. And actually by preventing that, we're actually prioritizing, the resolution is actually prioritizing certain refugees that need to be taken that actually has been negatively affected.
Although it does prioritize certain refugees, and sure, it does help these specific refugees in question. However, because of the larger refugee issue around the European area, it's more likely that it doesn't actually help anything at all because there's so many that need help that you're helping such a small amount, and it basically makes only a chip within the large issue that is the refugee crisis.
Follow up. So is the delegate stating that we should actually just blindly take refugees, even if they are for the purpose of being immigrants and just hidden in the misnomer of refugees? They should still be taken in by any nation because they're still, well, misnomer. It's a misnomer, but at least still refugees, even though they're actually immigrants.
Even if they are immigrants or refugees, it is the responsibility of a nation to protect the people of their own nation as well as the people of others, as it's just a basic human need for compassion. It's a basic emotion that should be felt by every single government at the very least, to at least perform the minimal actions to even just give housing at the bare minimum.
Thank you, Delegate of the United States of America for his opinions. However, does the Delegate of the United States not realize the fact that what he is stating, or what he is the Delegate of the United States stating that the global communities, including the European Union, should be prioritizing the 60% of immigrants and should not be classifying them as refugees that are not urgent because of currently the refugees that are in danger.
Sorry, there was like an internet cutout. Could the delegate please repeat that?
So is the Delegate of the United States saying that we should ignore the dangers that the Class 1 and Class 2 refugees are currently being put in, where these people are being directly threatened by the totalitarian government that they can probably be originating from? We should not be prioritizing them because of the 60% economic immigrants, people that are solely there for economic reasons. We should not be as the Delegate saying that we should not be prioritizing people whose lives are in danger. It's because of those people that slide over the Mediterranean because of economic opportunities.
There should be a very clear line between what it means to be an immigrant and what it means to be a refugee. There shouldn't be any immigrants within the refugees at all, because people who are classified as refugees are people who are escaping their own nation because of some kind of turmoil or conflict within it that threatens their own lives. If that's the case, then people who should be being welcomed are like refugees by definition in the first place. Most refugees will not be immigrants because immigrants will be leaving as immigrants and being stated as immigrants within the immigration system.
Brief follow-up, sir.
Granted, and also reminder that direct conversation between delegates are not allowed.
However, as stated earlier by the Delegate of France, according to European Union, 60% of the 60% of the refugees that come into the European Union, 60% of the refugees that come from the European Union actually should not be refugees, as they're solely sliding into the European Union for economic purposes. And the purpose of this resolution is to further distinguish real refugees and immigrants that are sliding into Europe under the title of refugees.
Does the Delegate of France not realize that they just use data that they created themselves? The European Union created that 60% data in order to support their own judgments just now.
The answer to the POI should not be in question format.
The delegate believes that using information which the European Union created in order to support the opinion of the European Union is quite a stretch in order to support their own point. As a result, this delegate does not believe that that number is truly accurate, or at least the investigations necessary to conduct that and create that data point is accurate.
Okay, thank you, Delegate. Would the Delegate like to use the floor back to the Chair or turn it to the Delegate?
Back to the Chair.
That is in order. So it's 12. So let's go to lunch. Let's go to lunch and continue the debate after lunch.